Saga Podcast.
Okay, and with that rousing musical kind of uplifting us into this, I guess we're gonna talk about the Star Wars Unlimited trading card game, and I guess to start things off, let's just kind of go through everybody, maybe talk about our background with games, our background with Star Wars, and kind of what brought us here. So I'll throw it to you, Banana, first.
BananaCrapshoot. Happy to be here. First off, a little bit about me. I'm a dad, 3 kids, 7, 5, and 3. First got into gaming. My first interaction with card gaming, I was probably like 9 or 10, and it was the Decipher CCG, but I had no idea what I was doing. They were just Star Wars cards, And my uncle played, and I remember going to his house and playing at the kitchen table with him. But I did not get into competitive card gaming at all until Star Wars Destiny. That was my first jump into competitive card games. So did Star Wars Destiny till that, died. And now I've just been playing games casually, like Final Fantasy trading card game versus System 2 PCG, various other card games, but it's all been at the casual level. So I'm excited to jump back into possibly another game at a casual, semi-competitive level with Star Wars Unlimited. So yeah, it's quick and dirty. Dan?
Yeah, so you're passing me the banana. So I'm Dan, or KennedyHawk on the internets. I've played a lot of card games. I started playing card games when I was real little. I started in Magic in the Ice Age block, so that was like block 2 or 3 for Magic. And I've played just about every TCG that my store is willing to sell to me since then, for at least one set, right? Try it out and then dip out if I don't like it. But the games that I played the most were definitely Magic, eventually Pokemon, and the Decipher CCG. I did play the Wizards Star Wars card game, the one with the dice. Young Jedi, just about every Star Wars card game or miniatures game that FFG or anyone has put out, I've played at some point. I played a lot of the Star Wars LCG. It's probably my favorite LCG of all time. I loved the pod-based deck building. I loved the engine that Eric Lang and Nate French came up with, and I'll love that game forever. Eventually, it rolled me into Destiny, and then it rolled me right out because I couldn't handle the dice for more than a couple sets due to storage. And now I mainly play more casual kitchen table games. I do dip in the local competitive scene, but no travel or anything big for me, typically. So on to MrBen.
Well, I also have a relatively long history with games. I got as competitive as I could with chess when I was kind of in elementary and middle school. But then eventually there was a girl that wanted to learn how to play Magic the Gathering, and I wanted her to like me. And that's how I discovered Magic the Gathering, roughly around the Ice Age block as well. And that girl's long since gone, but that set off a lifelong addiction to playing games. Most of the games that I play are at a casual level. You can't be hyper competitive about more than a few and do well. But I do really like competing, analyzing the meta, playing in high pressure situations. These are all things that I really, really like. And like most other people born in the 80s, I absolutely fell in love with Star Wars at a young age. And despite some of my feelings about maybe some of those prequel films, I'm still a pretty hardcore fan through and through. So that kind of introduces us. Do we want to dive into talking about the live stream and kind of reactions to that? And then we can lay out sort of the visions for where we want this show to go at the end. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay. So I did go through the live stream again today, and I took kind of chronological notes. So there's a few topics here, so I'll kind of attack it in the same order that they did on the live stream, and then we'll just have a chance to kind of talk about all the things that they went over. So the first thing that they brought up, and I think from a marketing standpoint, they absolutely had to have this be the first thing they brought up, which was talking about Star Wars Destiny. Now, that's not a game I was super involved in, but as people who played Star Wars Destiny, hearing that FFG is coming to take another swing at a Star Wars card game, I guess we'll start with you, Dan. Do you have any reactions to being a Destiny player, hearing about this new game? What's going through your head about that?
Yeah, so I posted it in the channel on our Discord today, but this is the first time meme for me. So when Destiny came out, I had become heavily invested in the Star Wars LCG. I probably had 2 copies of everything because I wanted to have 2 decks built at the same time. And Destiny came out, and it seemed like the thought was, well, we're not gonna get rid of this other game. And then before the first set even came out, there was a pack where they announced the death of the LCG, in the bottom of the article. So um, I understand the feelings from Destiny fans that they really miss their game Destiny, and I miss it too. It was a really fun game, but I'm hopeful that this game can be just as exciting and strategic as Destiny was, especially since they hinted that this game seems like it's going to have some of that my action, your action gameplay. So it's going to get a little bit of the spirit of Destiny, and maybe a little bit of the spirit of the LCG into some sort of beautiful beast. I'm hopeful. A new hope.
Sure, Banana. Coming from
Wonder,
from the
Josh,
perspective of
yeah.
a Destiny player,
I am optimistically hesitant, I guess is a good way to say it. So I didn't have the long history of, like, I didn't play Netrunner, right? So the people that have played FFG games traditionally, like, so Android Netrunner was another one that people really loved. A lot of people say it's the best card game they've ever played, competitive LCG. There was a licensing snafu or something, from what I understand. They didn't like renew their license for that IP, so then they had to stop producing the game. Um, I have no idea what the deal was with Game of Thrones LCG, but I know that was also a competitive LCG. So like they've had this long history of designing great games, but the company itself has failed the player base really. Um, and the same thing was true, I think, with Star Wars Destiny. It was a great game even when it wasn't, because the community around it was great and the players is what made it great. Um, but like I'm forever thankful for the memories and opportunities that I had with Star Wars Destiny, the people I met, like all the content creators were great. Getting into content creation because of Star Wars Destiny um, with Mr. Chip and Discard to Reroll was an awesome experience, and like going to events and talking to people as a content creator was a cool experience. So and that's all because of Star Wars Destiny. So I'll always have a soft spot for it. But the lack of transparency and the way FFG handled how Destiny died left a bad taste in most people's mouths. So you get why people are very hesitant. Like on Facebook and Twitter, you see, oh, it's FFG. They're gonna mess this one up again. It's gonna be gone in 3 years, right? We get that, but so far they're saying the right things, which we'll get into more, I'm sure. But hesitantly optimistic.
so one thing that stood out to me within the live stream is they multiple times used the term manufacturing restrictions or referred to manufacturing in some way. Now, that to me, and obviously I don't have inside knowledge, but that screams, hey, getting the dice made was a problem. And the fact that they kind of laid that out and talked about that being an influence on how they wanted to approach the new game. We don't want gimmicky things. We don't want manufacturing issues that are going to impact. What was it? We don't want manufacturing issues to restrict what you can put in your deck. Like a lot of that language felt to me like, and maybe this is fair or not fair, but it felt like they were kind of blaming some of the issues on the unique element of the TCG plus dice. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's, I mean, I don't know. Another thing I'd throw out there, while I didn't play Destiny, my first truly hardcore, well, maybe my second truly hardcore love in the TCG space was the original Versus system, which fans of that game can already probably feel the trauma response in them with regard to how Upper Deck handled winding that game down. So much so that I swore off Upper Deck products for a number of years. However, due to the influence of my friends getting me into the new Versus system, Upper Deck has shown that it is possible for a company to learn from some of these mistakes. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't ever have critiques for the way Upper Deck has handled the new versus system either. My point is simply that, hey, that game's surviving and thriving. We're 8 years in. So the idea that FFG, even though maybe they fumbled with Destiny, I don't think that means they're guaranteed to fumble with the new game.
Yeah, that's fair.
I guess
we've always kind of heard that whispers, right, from in the Star Wars Destiny community, that the dice manufacturing of the dice was the holdup for product delays for all kinds of stuff. And I have to imagine the size of the dice, and they were like nice quality, like almost like custom laser printing. It looked like on 6 custom die sides, right, producing that much. I imagine the quality control on that was terrible, like having to keep up with it. And we always heard whispers. This is the first time that I know of that they've like officially said like, "Hey, the dice was the screw up."
So, well, to be clear,
it's good on
the
them
live
for
stream,
like
they didn't explicitly say the dice was the holdup, but just the way they talked about manufacturing. That's the impression I got.
Well, it has to be.
I don't want to put words in anybody else's mouth either.
If you have an issue manufacturing. Yeah.
If cards were the
it's
holdup,
probably
we're in
not the
trouble.
cards.
So
yeah.
If the cards are the issue, then this is
the sad news of how Destiny went down, and let's move into some of the more exciting stuff. So the next thing they hit in the live stream was to talk about several data points about the game. So I'm going to run these down and then give everybody a chance to kind of chew into it. So they made a claim that this game is fast-paced, accessible, and easy to learn for new players, but also has the strategic depth and the skill expression for the more hardcore TCG players. They mentioned you could play 3 to 5 games within an hour, and claims that games are going to run. Short games are probably going to be around 7 minutes, with longer like Control Mirrors at about 20 minutes. So overall, taking all of these claims at face value, how does that make you feel about jumping into Star Wars Unlimited? I'll throw it to Banana here.
I think every card game that comes out now says they're fast, accessible, easy to learn. I hope that 7 minutes is an outlier, right? If you play 3 games in 20 minutes, right? I hope you're playing Marvel Snap and not an at the table TCG. The 20 minutes a game, I probably like, because I'm hoping that's more realistic, because then you're thinking like a 1 hour best out of 3 format, maybe for events. Like that seems respectable and doable. So I don't think any of that's really crazy. The 7 minutes kind of jumps out as like like, are you just going to get steamrolled? Like, is there yeah, like why was that game only 7 minutes long? You're going to spend more time shuffling some games than actual gameplay, so the 7 minutes seemed like an outlier. The 3 to 5 games an hour, if 3 games an hour, 20 minutes, I'm fine with that. That seems on par with other card games I've played recently, not Flesh and Blood,
Yeah, I sort of agree. I think the 7 minutes, I'm hopeful that it's an outlier. I think that, I play One Piece TCG a lot at our local store now, and if I catch someone with their pants down, I can definitely finish a game in 7 minutes, but it's because someone made a mistake, not because that's the normal game time. And what I've learned for that, we do 50-minute rounds, and in some of my matches, I play an aggro deck, so we're going 7 minutes, and we finish our match, and then we get to play 4 more games before the round ends. And against a control deck, sometimes we go to time. So just because one game went 7 minutes doesn't mean they're all going to go. I really like the idea of 20-minute or less games so that you can do best of 3, because in TCG formats, there's inherently some randomness with the deck, right? So if you can even some of that out with sideboarding and with best of 3 format, then that makes me really happy, because it's in longer games like Star Wars LCG, right? You had to play the dark side and the light side, and those games were limited to like an hour per round, and they would always go to time because you would never finish the 2 games. But the promise or thought of being able to finish 3 games in an hour a round has me really excited.
When I first came to the Versus 2 PCG, one of the things I didn't like about the competitive structure was that it was a best of 1 with no possibility for a tie tournament structure. And I was really, really hostile to that. Now, over the years, I've kind of come to accept that, hey, this is just the way it is in this game. But the idea of being able to play a best of three, when you mentioned sideboards, I got a little excited. I didn't even think about sideboarding, but yeah, that would be another avenue for some skill expression. I certainly hope that it's feasible to do best of threes with this game in the competitive scene. Maybe they talk about how there's like store championships. Like, sure, store events can be like best of one, but when we're getting into the more competitive because of the variance, uh, and a lot of times as a TO, the reason you opt for best of one instead of best of three totally comes down to game length. So if these claims are correct that we could fit 3 to 5 games into an hour, I'm excited for what that means competitively. So to kind of dig a little bit more into the specifics of the game, they talked about how there's going to be 2 essential components that are going to be in play throughout the game. That's the direct quote. So what that says to me is the base, which the objective of the game is to destroy the other person's base, and the leader card, which is your, I'm going to say main character because of the versus influence, but I get the impression that these are going to be features that are going to be on the game board when the game starts, and at the point that the game is over, that means your base has been destroyed in some capacity. One of the cards they revealed does say that it checks how much HP a base has, so all this kind of tracks together. Coming from Versus, the idea of having this character that means the most to me. If Wolverine's my favorite character, he's in play. He's in play for the whole game. That's an element of this leader base setup here that I really, really like. Did you guys have any comments about the leader base mechanics? We'll go to Dan this time. Sorry,
I
didn't
love
pick
the
somebody.
idea. I'm excited to see how it. Oh, you're fine. I just jumped in because I'm excited. I love the idea. I'm excited to see how it works out. I love double-sided cards. I'll be interested to see how that works in a pack, right? The sealed play, like you fan out your cards and everybody knows what one of them are. So that'll be interesting. But I think the concept of having a leader, I'm a casual versus player, so nowhere near as good as MrBen. But that's my favorite thing about versus is you pick this main character that you're building a comic book around, and then that changes your whole deck. So you could build 2 decks with the same faction with the same limited set of cards and probably come out with completely different win conditions, completely different gameplay styles, and completely different cost curves because you're basing it around this card that starts in play. So the fact that now there's a card that is like double-sided that starts in play, somehow you flip from the leader side, I guess with this epic action, like the Luke Skywalker card says, if you control 6 or more resources, we don't know what those are, but something, deploy this leader, flip him, ready him, and move him to the ground arena. So you're automatically know you're going to have some ground arena unit at some point, and they might have different abilities on the 2 sides. We can see that Luke does based on that card fan and the sideways leader card, whatever the terminology is for that. I think that's going to be super, super exciting to build around. I think that is really going to help casual players be able to build a deck, right? They say Luke gives shields, so they can just search for all the cards that interact with that, assuming there are more, and they slam together a Luke deck without having to think too much about it. And then the really skilled or like over obsessive players like me can try to find out the right optimization of how many shield cards to include. So I think having that like entry point character is like super important to make a game engaging for new players, experienced players, and everybody. What do you think, Josh?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
There's the sound.
Yeah, I'm excited. I like the there's the soundboard. So I love the idea of the leader that you build your deck around. One thing I liked about Dragon Ball Super was that same effect, right? You have a leader, which is double-sided. You flip it, it becomes more powerful. Seems a little different. You're not. Doesn't seem like you're leveling up the character, right? Which would be also because I mean, basically in versus, you could consider them double-sided. You level them up, you're going to a different side of that character. This seems a little different, where it seems based off the Luke invaders. Is that right? Because we've seen both sides, the deployed side and the non-deployed side, if that's what we're going to call it. But it seems like I don't know if this is the right term, but more passive, right? Like Luke says action, I'm guessing that means exhaust or tap. There's an arrow. Give a shield token to a unit you played this phase. I mean, that seems kind of like more passive. And then once he's deployed as a ground unit, put into play as a ground unit, then he's like a little more active because then, I mean, we don't know what these numbers mean, but we are assuming they're attack values of some sort, right? You gotta deal damage somehow. So I like that they kind of, I don't know, they're like a leader on a battlefield and then they're getting involved. I don't know. Seems cool to me. I'm
The
down.
way they described it in the live stream was that the front side of the card, the non-deployed side, is kind of like the strategy. It informs how you build your deck and kind of the broad strokes of what you want to try to do. Whereas the portrait side, like deciding when to deploy, is more a question of tactics and kind of the in the moment decision making. Which these are all great mouth sounds. Like if somebody's making a game, these are all the kind of things that I want to hear about that's going into that game. And as much as the original Versus system is one of my all-time favorite games, one of the biggest flaws in that game is my friend introduces it to me. I'm like, okay, I want to play with Batman. So we put Batman in my deck. I can't even get him out to the board until turn 3, and by turn 4, he's gone. It's like, okay, I'm not really playing with Batman. So if I want to play with Han Solo, I mean, I assume we're going to have a Han Solo. Come on, but we know we have a Luke and a Vader. If that's your favorite guy, that guy's in play when you start the game. I think that's just genius. I think it's a really good idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so old Versus, the biggest flaw was that when my friend introduced me to the game, he's like, who's the superhero you want to play with? I said Batman. So we put Batman in my deck. But the cheapest Batman that existed in the game, I couldn't play him until turn 3. And then by turn 4, he's dead and gone. And it's like, I'm not really playing with Batman. So this concept of having my Luke Skywalker, or I assume a Han Solo at some point, like the most iconic characters that people are going to be the most excited to see, they're going to be on the board when the game starts. I'm kind of starting to loop on this, but I'm so excited about it as a mechanic that I think it's really, really positive. Speaking of another really positive thing, the action sequencing. So the way they described it in the live stream, it sounds very akin to how Runeterra works, where I'll just describe Runeterra because I know for sure how that works. One player gets to go first on each turn, and then the other player gets to make an action. You sort of trade back and forth with actions, and then at the end of the turn, the initiative switches. Now, I don't know if there's going to be an initiative system, but it definitely sounds like there's a shared turn happening here where I do a thing, you do a thing, and throughout the course of each round, maybe is what we'll call it, we're reacting to each other. And they said, I don't remember which guy it was, but the quote that I wrote down was that this action sequencing is the most skill testing moments within the game. So what are you guys' thoughts on the idea of trading that turn back and forth in that way? Oh, Josh,
I'll jump in first on this one if that's all right. That's fine. That's exactly how Destiny worked. In Star Wars Destiny, you rolled, and you could decide either if you go first or if you want to give 2 shields to your characters, and then from there, I do a thing, you do a thing, I do a thing, you do a thing, back and forth until 2 players pass. So in Destiny, there was a battlefield card. So if you won the roll off, if you didn't, if you could pick your battlefield or pick shields. If you picked battlefield, you go first. So you would claim the battlefield at the end of the turn, and then you would go first next round. So obviously we have no idea, but in Destiny you claimed a battlefield, and the battlefield was a separate card that had an effect that either had like an action on you could do as part of your turn, or it had a claim effect, like claim, gain a resource, something like that. So maybe there's going to be battlefield cards that determine where this is, but I don't know if that throws off the bases. But that's exactly how Destiny worked. That kind of removes the need for instant timing on like counter cards and stuff. So like I know like Bandai loves their counter timing cards, right? Where it's like, hey, counter, when this happens, you can play this card and do this thing. The I do a thing, you do a thing eliminates the need for that instant counter card, and I think makes the stack, we'll say, easier to go through when you don't have people countering. You know, I'm going to counter your counter and you counter my counter, and then we got to figure out which order we resolve the effects. I think it makes a cleaner flow of the game, even though it for people that aren't used to that I do a thing, you do a thing, it is a little bit to get used to, but I do like that flow of the game.
Agree. So I'm excited, and like you said, there's always going to be timing issues in every card game, right? Some rules lawyer, maybe me, or a rules trade federation person is going to find a corner that they've wandered into that they don't understand and have to ask a question. But the your action, my action removes a lot of that. So the way most of FFG's competitive LCGs have worked is they haven't had that your action, my action. It's been my turn for 15 minutes and then your turn for 15 minutes. That's an exaggeration. Maybe not 15 minutes, but some of them can go on really long. And for me, that's the most unengaging part of gaming, right? So I play a lot of Marvel Champions, and I complain about this a lot. In 4-player games, when I take my turn and I have to wait 20 minutes to get to the villain phase before the next turn, it is the most grueling 20 minutes of my life. There should be none of that in this, right? Because it's you take an action, there's no instance or responses, it sounds like. My response is my action. So I'm really excited about that because I think it keeps you engaged at all points in time during the game. At no point myself or my play partner wandering off because we're like, okay, they're going to do things on their board for 15 minutes while I sit over here and check my phone. I need to be paying attention constantly and seeing what they're doing. So that's awesome. Another thing that I really like about the my action, your action system, at least, is if it works like Destiny, which is what BananaCrapshoot was just talking about. In Destiny, a lot of that strategic thinking that they were talking about was about when do you reveal what your plan is for the round or the turn or whatever it's called, right? If I activated a character in Destiny and rolled the dice in, that gave you the chance to take a lot of time to remove those dice, but it might let me resolve those dice before you draw into the responses. So there's going to be this balance of how quickly do I show my opponent what my plan is, right? Do I play a bunch of things, or do we don't even know how attacking works yet, so it's hard to speculate, but like, do I attack and hold my cards back? How do I balance this, how much information I give away? Because the more information I give away, the easier it is for my opponent to make decisions. But the less information I give away, the less options I have. So there's some sort of optimization function in there that you can go through to figure out when do I start revealing information, and are there things I can reveal early to sort of like trick my opponent into thinking one thing instead of another. And I love that kind of gameplay in board games and card games and all sorts of games. The worst thing is downtime, and this removes as much downtime as possible. So I think this is going to be a very positive system without knowing anything.
Yeah,
so that's really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of being kind of boring, I agree with you guys. To reference old verses again, this was a game that had a shared turn sequence. It wasn't quite as clean as I do a thing, you do a thing, but the two players' turns were sort of woven together. A game like Legacy's Allure comes to mind, where it's very much the I do a thing, you do a thing. And while I am one of those players who I played with blue cards in Magic, and I'm a big fan of drawing cards and doing all the things, like I've told my playgroup many times, like, I like the decks where I get to do lots of things per turn. I don't care what those things are, but I just like lots of little decision points. Even though my bias is in favor of that kind of stuff, I have to agree with you guys with like timing concerns. And one of the fastest ways to kill the fun in a game is to get two players who both want to do something, and it turns into like a game of like a crazy eights or whatever, where they're trying to slap each other's hands, essentially trying to be the one who gets the initiative. I don't want any of that. I'm 42 years old. I don't want to play a dexterity game. I want to know what the rules are, be able to, and not get bogged down on those kinds of arguments. And really this one-to-one thing seems to solve a lot of those timing issues that in many other games I've seen people get really bogged down on. So yeah, at some point maybe I'll have a contrary opinion, but so far I'm pretty positive on everything that's come up, and I just agree with you guys. So the next major
I can be
part
contrarian if we need it.
Yeah, well, it may come up. Like we're only
right,
on page 3, so
that's true. Oh,
Well,
okay.
the
I'll let
next
you keep
major
going.
portion of the
I'll say
live
it next
stream,
time if I think of it.
I think this is significant specifically for this show because this is where they start talking about the space arena, ground arena, which is of some import with regard to the title. They broke down the difference between a simulation game where you're bogged down in all the mess of little details trying to make everything as realistic within the rules of Star Wars as possible versus an abstract game where, and the example they used multiple times was the idea of a Jawa being able to declare an attack into a Star Destroyer. And the answer they had for that to kind of balance the abstract with the simulation was introducing these two different arenas. Um, in old verses, they had kind of something similar to this, where there was a hidden area where you could play cards, but hidden cards couldn't automatically just hit other hidden cards. And based on what they said in this, it sounds like space units can shoot space units, ground units can shoot ground units, but not crossways. So this is not exactly similar to really anything I've encountered in a card game before, although like Elder Scrolls, the card game that they put out, kind of similar, but not quite the same. Dan, what are your thoughts on the simulation versus abstract concept and the idea of the two arenas?
Yeah, so I'm excited about that. I've played a bunch of Star Wars games. Some lean too heavily into simulation, some lean too heavily into abstract, right? And in the CCG, you would be, playing with Destiny and trying to recreate these scenes perfectly from the movie as your like weird win objective. And that sometimes got a little bit too crazy because sometimes the decks became so non-interactive that it was rough. And the Star Wars LCG, one of the big complaints about it was how abstract it was. You were targeting these objectives, and a Rancor could like eat a Star Destroyer, and people always brought that up as like their sticking point about why they hated the game. Myself, I'm more of an abstract person, so I'm like, okay, well, maybe there's a Rancor on this Star Destroyer, and he gets loose and he makes it crash, right? That totally makes sense. But there are a lot of people that don't like to have to do that much storytelling in their head, so I totally get that. And it seems like here, we don't know anything, right, about the Space Arena, Ground Arena, except what you said. It sounds like space units interact with space units, ground units interact with ground units. The leaders seem like they can interact with both, and maybe there'll be other cards that can do that, right? But it seems like the design space is super rich. You could make a bomber unit that only attacks ground units, and you could make like a mortar on the ground that's trying to shoot things out of the sky if they have a certain trait. So there's really cool ability to create this simulation. And what I'm most excited about, but a lot of people might not be, is that they said that they have no limit in their live stream on what Star Wars they can touch upon. So this might be a future topic, but right now everything we've seen has been from the original trilogy. So you can simulate the original trilogy like all the people that like the OT can do. But it sounds like they're not limited to just the original trilogy. So if we want to have Anakin's pod racer attacking Darth Vader someday, maybe we can do that. And that's a little bit of abstractness, right? Because those things couldn't happen at the same time in the real Star Wars universe, but now we're playing a game of like what if, or an abstracted level of the story that we all saw on the screens. So there's a little mix of both, and I think that's probably the best for targeting the most people in the Star Wars community.
I just love the visual, right? The story of an epic space battle happening at the same time as an epic ground battle with the objective of destroying your opponent's base, right? It makes me think of Return of the Jedi, right? Where you have right Lando and the Millennium Falcon trying to blow up another Death Star. Luke's on the Death Star fighting Vader, Palpatine, and then you got the crap happening on the Forest Moon of Endor, right? So it's like it's Star Wars. It's peak Star Wars to me. So the theme of that space arena, ground arena, destroy your opponent's base is peak Star Wars to me. So I'm excited for it. That's all I really have to say because Dan covered everything else pretty well.
It's the one question I was
So
ready for.
the next interesting bit from my notes here, they did confirm, at least for the first 12 months, it's going to be 3 sets in a year, as opposed to, I think, the 4 or more that has kind of become standard across TCG products from other games. I am completely okay with only 3 expansions in a year, especially when we're talking about 252 mechanically unique cards plus chases and everything else. Which I guess we'll get to the chase cards in just a second. But first, I wanted to throw out the names of the 3 expansions that we're going to get in the first year. So that's Spark of Rebellion, Shadows of the Galaxy, and Twilight of the Republic.
That I'll talk more about Space Arena, Ground Arena, and something they said in the live stream. So they mentioned that in the live stream that managing these 2 arenas is going to be like a critical decision point for the game. Maybe my opponent has too many things in ground, so I need to put things in space so I can sneak through. Or maybe I need to put things in ground to defend my base. So that's also going to be super important for deck building, is my guess, right? I can, depending on what the deck building restrictions are, maybe they make you have so many units from each arena, but I can imagine you could make decks that are super ground arena focused, or other decks that only focus on the space arena, and that gives you a ton of options about deck building and gameplay. So you're getting options all around the table.
Again, so the first 12 months of products are going to be Spark of Rebellion, Shadows of the Galaxy, and Twilight of the Republic. Now, I'm assuming all the cards we've seen so far are coming out of that first release, that Spark of Rebellion, which seems to be relatively centered on like the original trilogy. And I noticed the Shadows of the Galaxy like font was very reminiscent of Star Wars Rebels, so that would be my guess for that one, the animated series. But Twilight of the Republic, I'm a little bit less clear on where that's going to be situated. Do you guys have any guesses about any clues that may have been planted by showing us these 3?
So my hope of Spark of the Rebellion is like the beginning of the rebellion, or maybe like a New Hope focused, right? So maybe some rebels, maybe some, I don't know what legends or comic books are in that era, but everything we've seen so far is like a New Hope era. I guess the AT-ST on maximum firepower is from the Hoth battle at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. The Shadows of the Galaxy, obviously for my opinion, the elephant in the room here is the Shadows of the Empire book with Grant, who was in that, Prince Zizor and things like that way back in the day. So I'm hoping that that's like a Shadows of the Empire style expansion, which would tell us right away that they're not sticking to whatever's only in the movies. They're going to all sorts of things. I guess not right away in set 2. And Twilight of the Republic is the one I agree I have the least information on. Twilight is like the end, right? And the Republic was the thing before the Rebel Alliance and the Empire. So my guess is end of the prequels area, or again, maybe some more stuff that happens right before Spark of the Rebellion era kind of stuff. But those are my best guesses.
I think also the Shadows of the Galaxy is kind of reminiscent of like a Guardians of the Galaxy like font. So I'm not really sure where I think that one's going to go, but if it's like Guardians of the Galaxy like nodded as to like, you know, Star-Lord's outlaw, right? So
it's got the yellow font.
Yeah, maybe it's like
yeah,
Scum and Villainy type, maybe. If that's the nod, but
Twilight of the
Go ahead.
Oh, Twilight of the Republic could also be Old Republic based, right? So there's a lot of Star Wars video games, comics, and lore in the Old Republic era, which is way, way beyond anything we've seen on the screens for the most part. So to me, when they told us that they weren't limited, I got super excited. And then I saw the set names and I was even more excited.
I mean, it could also be like the High Republic, right? We have
that's
some nods to that in the new Jedi Survivor video game, and there's a whole bunch of novels and comic books now about that area, so maybe getting some of that.
It's the thing right now.
Yeah, so I am
so this is a
okay
touch
with
out of
sets a year.
Order in how they touched on it. Go ahead, man.
No, I'm okay with 3 sets a year. I think it's great. That's what Final Fantasy does, and I can keep up with it. So we're gonna jump to something.
The art. A little bit later, they talked about how they wanted a distinctive and unique style specific to this game, and they wanted that. obviously you want your game to be distinct, but they wanted that because it allowed them to pull from all different sorts of shows and movies that have their own art styles and yet make them into an unlimited art style, which I think is really smart. That we're not going to have one card that looks like CGI and one card that looks like an actor, bringing it all into this unified like comic style, no matter where they're pulling from. I think is really cool, and I think ultimately that's going to result in like a more cohesive. As much as I love versus 2 PCG, when you're looking at illustrated cards compared to photographic cards, like it's a little jarring. It's not nice to the eyes.
Yeah, totally agree. I like that there's going to be a cohesive art style. I think that's going to help the game a lot. I would say some of the art choices they've shown us are interesting, but I'm glad that they're going with this cohesive style. The thing that makes me sad is there is such a rich history of already commissioned art from FFG, right? They had thousands of cards in the LCG, thousands of cards in Imperial Assault, thousands of cards in Destiny, and they'd always commission a few more each set through all the games to create this giant library. So it was always exciting to me in Destiny when I'd be like, I remember that art from Imperial Assault and I did this cool thing with it. So we're no longer going to be seeing that same art anymore, which is a little bit of a bummer. But at the same time, sometimes, like, I remember the first time the Rebels showed up in Star Wars LCG, whatever art they got was a little bit uncanny valley and strange, right? It was still like trying to be the style for that game, but the characters just looked not like the Rebels characters, but also not like characters from that game, and it threw me off of ever wanting to use those sets, even though they were really strong. So having a consistent art style is a big plus for me. It allows the graphic design to be like integrated into the art style better as well, right? If they can commission all new art or pick art based on a specific criteria, it should help a lot with cohesion.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think while the art, they did have a good library, I was kind of sick of seeing the same stuff over and over again. So having that unified art style for the comics, video games, movies, TV shows, right? Like, so one thing about Final Fantasy TCG is there's 30,000 different art styles in that game.
Mm-hmm.
The cards all look different, right? So that does kind of throw me off. At one point, it was kind of cool, right? Because you have like the Final Fantasy Tactics art style for those characters and Final Fantasy 7 art style for those characters, but they didn't stay true to that, and it's kind of all over the place all the time, and it is a little jarring at times. So having one art style across the board, I think, is a good idea.
FFTCG is such a good example of a game that is jarring to look at. If you walk up on two people playing that game and you look at this card and that card, they look so visually distinctive. It's like, oh, they can't possibly be the same thing. No, they're both forwards. They just look radically different. And I'm uptight enough of a person that I like some uniformity. Although while we're on the topic of art, they did reveal to us that while all 252 mechanically unique cards within the set will have some kind of a basic, easily accessible version, there are going to be different frames, foilings, alternate art cards that are available for collectors to chase, and that these different versions, these cosmetic upgrades on these cards are going to go, quote, well beyond 252 cards. I have no idea how many variations that is, but if we assume each card gets one variant, that doubles it right there. So now we're talking about 500 plus cards in the expansion. They did also mention that by making sure that the basic cards are available for everybody, it will, in a way, kind of separate the player base so that the players, the people that just want to be able to play the game are going to be able to get the cheap versions, and the collector investor class of TCG player can chase after those more expensive things. Now, as somebody who generally classifies as a player more than a collector, I think that sounds wonderful. However, I am also aware that card games, that supply and demand is a real thing when it comes to card games being successful. So I wonder if there's maybe a little bit of a danger move there if the only people that care about the variant cards are the collectors and not the players. Is the value going to be there to keep the attention of the investors? What could that mean for the long-term health of the game? I don't know if Ken, do you want to speculate on
Yeah,
any of that grab bag of ideas I just threw at you?
I'll be curious to see how that works out. As a person who spends half of their life in the Bling the Game channel on the Marvel Champions Discord, I'm very terrified of the fact that every card could have an alternate art because it could very much upset my wallet. But I can also be controlled and, control those impulses and just use the basic cards. To me, this feels like a, I don't know, cart before horse situation, right? They're telling us that all of the cards will be easily accessible, but I've never seen a TCG formula where that was the case, right? There's always some sort of rare cards. Maybe there's not like a secret rare like they put in the Bandai cards where it's one per box or one per case, but at some point there has to be some sort of rarity level to randomize the packs, or so I would assume. So there's going to be some sort of cards that are rarer than the others. So those are always inherently going to have more value unless they print so many copies of that it becomes not scarce. I do think that even players that are more players still like to bling out their deck for their competitive events, right? I know in One Piece, all of the, or most of the super rare cards, which are like one in every 6 packs, also have like an alt art variant. And the cost of that alt art variant is often orders of magnitude higher than the cost of just the regular super rare. Like a super rare from set 1 or 2 might be $10 and the alternate art might be 100. So that's probably healthy, right? To have some cards that have some value, but a lot of your common and uncommon cards might be pennies. I'll be curious to see what the distribution of cards is, and what most of the cards being accessible to most of the player base truly means to FFG, right? If I buy a box, assuming there's booster boxes of this, am I going to get a copy of each card? Am I going to get a playset of each card? Probably not. But maybe locally there'll be enough playsets that you can trade and sort of get whatever faction you want to play. So I'll be curious to see what the distributions are actually like rather than what they're telling us they're going to be like, because we won't really know anything until we see how many people are playing the game, how many people are ripping open boxes, and what the market looks like.
I also think that's probably another area where Destiny dropped the ball, right? Is there was no alternate foil versions of cards that you could open up in booster packs, right? So, and we never, I mean, we got alternate art in promos, in given out at events for finishes, but you never got like a chance at an alternate art or a foil in a booster pack. And they never touched alternate like dice, right? Like that was an area that people wanted forever. Was like, like instead of your red dice with the picture on it, if it was like galaxied, right? That would have been pretty awesome, right? So going into a little bit of the collector side a little bit, I think is pretty smart. It's whatever. I think there'll be some crossover. Like, I don't know that I'll go and try to buy every alternate art or every foil or whatever the special treatments are, but I'll get some, I'll try to put as many as I can in my deck without, having to sell kids. So
I know we bragged about Final Fantasy TCG a little bit, and I really hope they follow that model. Like when I buy a box of Final Fantasy TCG, whatever the top rarity is, you get a ton of it in the box, and most of the value you're getting out of alternate arts that you sell to collectors that really like that art style. So with this unique art style, I don't know if it lends itself to that or not. But I really like that concept of like, you don't get one of every card in a TCG box, but you probably Final Fantasy TCG box, but you probably get a playset of commons and uncommons, one of each rare, and most of whatever the rarity level above that is. And like the rarity level's capped there. There's not some super sought after, super secret, super duper rare. That's saved for alt arts and foils and special things. So I hope that my biggest fear with their talk about that, they started talking about alt arts and frame breaks and foils and all sorts of things, and it felt like a kitchen sink. We're going to throw all the cool things that people like into a pack and hope they buy it. And I hope it's a little bit more congealed or consistent than what I was hearing. I'll be a downer for this question.
To that end, talking about pack distribution, they did specifically call out that, and they labeled this as essential. So I'm not putting words in their mouth. These words came out of their mouth that it was essential that pack distribution would be conducive to both draft and sealed, which I'm a huge fan. When I played Magic, when I played the original Versus, as much as I love constructed and trying to think of the most broken, intricate combos that required exactly these cards and a full play set of the money rares, opening packs and just building decks out of whatever you get is some of the most fun I've ever had with my friends. And seeing a game that's taking that seriously and baking that into how they're setting their packs up, it almost makes me think like the standard distribution is going to be kind of the cards that we all need to play, the basic cards as they call them. And then like your rare slot, rather than being a mechanically unique rare card, that's where this alternate art stuff is going to fall in these packs. Speculation, of course, but if every mechanically unique card is going to be accessible, I don't know how any of them could necessarily be like a mythic rare or super rare or whatever.
What I heard with that sealed play comment was that they want you to be able to play with just a set of like 5 to 6 packs. And they already told us, right, bases and leaders are like essential to your deck. So my assumption is that there's going to be a leader and a base in every pack. Or like other games that have a similar concept to that, like My Hero Academia, the CCG, they give stores printed copies of all the heroes that you have to start with in play. So when you play sealed play, the store can have a bunch of printed copies of those cards that start in play, and you just pick whichever one matches. So my interpretation was initially that there's going to be bases and heroes in every, or bases and leaders, is that what they're called, in every pack? Main characters, I can't remember. And then I hadn't thought about the idea that maybe there is no rarity, and the rarity is just in alt arts and foils. That would be a really cool concept. Josh, did you have any thoughts on that?
I have nothing else to add to this part of the conversation.
All right. So while we're on the topic of collectible stuff and things that we probably don't need to but could spend money on, they did also mention that GameGenic is going to do a full line of products to support this. I assume that's got to be like sleeves, playmats, deck tins, something to that effect. Did you guys have anything to throw in on that?
GameGenic's making pretty good quality stuff right now, so I'm cool with this.
Yeah, they make sleeves and playmats for every Marvel Champions hero, so I'm assuming it's going to be the same sort of stuff.
Even just their generic plain color sleeves, I've switched over all my stuff to, I use GameGenic for everything now, so I don't know if my loyalty to a sleeve brand makes me biased towards liking this stuff, but maybe it does. Okay, so I think the last bit of the live stream that we haven't touched on yet is the way they broke down organized play. And the way they referred to this was the 3 C's. So this is connect, collect, and compete. And they had, whoa, my camera got pretty wild there. This connect, collect, compete framework is applied both to the casual events that you're going to be doing at your local game store, as well as maybe the travel tournaments, which would be like your galactic championships. So looking at the casual side of things, every set's going to have a pre-release. Every set is going to have some kind of support for weekly play. I'm assuming that's going to be like promos that the store can hand out. And then the competitive element of the casual side is the store showdown. So there's kind of a tier to get you into the store and hype for the product, coming back regularly to keep playing and building that community, and then maybe dip your toe into the competitive element without having to like go to spend money in hotel and travel to go to a far off tournament. So from a casual side, I know I've been kind of throwing this to you guys first, but I'm going to comment here. I think this sounds perfect. This is exactly what I want to hear from them. Josh, do you have any thoughts on the casual OP?
I think it is. I'm sorry, I'm bringing it up on my phone so I can look at it too. I think it is a good step in the right direction. Traditionally, from my experience with Destiny, the organized play wasn't that great. So having a way to get into the game casually, semi-competitively is a step in the right direction. You know, if you just want to play your weeklies and maybe do, you know, whatever they called it, the store showdown. I think it's a great idea. There you go. There it is. Thanks.
I got it. Got you.
You got it. I think it's a good step in the right direction. A lot of the stuff they outlined with the OP just in general seems like a good step in the right direction. Now it's, again, hesitantly optimistic that they can actually follow through with it.
I'm going to try to not be too negative because you're both so positive here. But I'm a...
No, bring it on. Dissenting
I'm a
opinion's
show me
good.
person, not a tell me person. I've been playing FFG
True.
games for a decade, and we used to joke in the LCG days, they would always launch like a new organized play website, like yearly it seemed, and we would always Photoshop it to say disorganized play, because that's what it felt like. It felt like there wasn't a steering mechanism. They do a bunch of market research that would end up being like 3 to 4 years out of date, which was a trigger for me when they were saying, we've been working on this for 3 years. We've done a lot of research. And I was like, how much of this research is from 5 years ago when the world was different, right? The idea of having pre-releases for every set and then weekly play and then store showdowns is great. But I feel like they used to have monthly OP kits in the LCG and they struggled to deliver them, or they'd deliver them only to partner stores, and stores that maybe had smaller local metas would get left out. And it really disincentivized local play. And then they would use that data to pick where regionals were in their old organized play championship. So they haven't really given us an explanation of the difference between what we're talking about, the competitive stuff later, but I'll be curious to see what they can show us instead of just telling us. So I'm optimistic. I'm happy. They're telling me all the right things. So it tells me maybe they did some good market research. But I also feel like this is like the 4th or 5th time I've had someone from organized play tell me all the right things that ends with, we're going to make a website for our game. And to me, I'm like thinking, people are making websites for games 20 years ago. Is that really like an innovative thing that we should be excited about? It is. We want player IDs. We want points tracking and the ability to do cool things at local play. But if you're going to wow me and show me something new, show me something actual new, not something that several game companies have done for the other TCGs that were successful. But what are we going to have to take it to the next level to make me play this over something else beyond just the Star Wars IP that I love? So I want them to show me more, which, I mean, this is their first article, so I can't complain too much, or their first live stream. But I'm still on the fence about how I feel about all the things they're telling me I feel are great. But until I actually see them, I don't know how much I believe them.
That's completely fair. I can't argue against any of that, because if what rolls out is a situation like you described, where some stores have access to the product, other stores don't have access to the product, that doesn't incentivize people to come play. That incentivizes people to play a different game. If I can't go to my store and get the weekly play promos, but other people are posting about them on Facebook, that doesn't make me want to spend my money on this game. So I totally agree with you. The money, you can't put your money on these words. You got to put the money on the follow through, and giving them the benefit of the doubt that they do follow through. I like the sound of this system, but I agree with you. Talking about something and then not following through is not going to win me over long run.
My biggest fear is that they just like released organized play for Marvel Champions, and people were super excited to have organized play back now that there's local stores opening for local play again. And their plan was to release these booster packs for a non-collectible game, and it fell very, very poorly on like the actual community. And talking to community members about that, it feels like they felt like organized play was completely out of touch with the community. So my fear, and maybe this is just my recent bias from living that experience, is I'm now worried that like they're saying the right things, right? When they said, hey, we're going to do organized play for Marvel Champions that have story-driven kits, it was all the right things that were said. And then the product that came out was like so enraging that some people fictitiously said they're going to quit the game. Now, they didn't actually quit, as far as I know, but like it gives me worry for now. So hopefully that means that a lot more market research was done into how TCGs work and how TCG organized play should go, and that will work out well for SWU.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Well, good. Never tell me that.
Yeah, the booster pack thing with Marvel Champions was just infuriating. every inch of it. I fully agree with your comments there. But to talk about Unlimited, I do want to touch on the little bit that they gave us on competitive play. And they also broke that down into 3 places. It's the sector championships, the regional championships, and the galactic. And one of the guys said, one of these will be played at your local store, but they never specified which. Now, my guess is sector championships is how you can earn your tournament points in your local store. And regional and galactic, depending upon how small of a community you're from, you may need to travel for those. Again, I kind of have the exact same feeling about the casual. These are the words I want to hear from a company that's putting out a competitive game. I like every inch of what they're saying, but, kind of like Dan said, if the follow through isn't there, then the words are kind of cheap. Did you guys have any comments on the competitive aspect of OP?
I think it kind of sounds like what Destiny was trying to do at the end, right? Store champs, and then would be, I'm guessing what you said was sectional. The next tier up, I would think, was probably like your regional, and then the next one up would be like your Gen Con and Nova, your nationals, and which is kind of weird to me that Star Wars Destiny, the card game, their nationals was played at Nova, which is a miniatures convention. So, yeah, like you go to Nova and you walk from the hotel in, and there's dudes carrying nothing but like 40K armies on magnetic trays walking into that place, and then here I am with a backpack.
They got them handcuffed to their wrist.
Yeah, and here I am with a deck box, and a play mat, and these dudes are carrying backpacks full of minis. But whatever. That's probably because they already had the end. They were already going to be there for like X-Wing and Armada, so it's like, let's get this other space. But I think it kind of sounds like what they were already trying to do at the end of. So at the end of Destiny, right? They revamped OP again, and they were going to have 2 store championships a year, which we never saw a store championship after they announced we were going to get 2 a year. And then, what they did well was that last Prime season, the price support for that was actually pretty good. But they never had a player ID system, which is a huge fail. So having some sort of player tracking system, and not only just for like to qualify for events, but to track banning players, right? To disciplinary issues. It makes it so much easier when you have a player ID system in place. Like Dan, I don't know if he wants to talk about it, was at a store where a dude threatened to kill somebody. Come back with a gun. Right?
Star Wars
So,
Destiny
like,
at its best.
Dude.
And so he was eventually banned, like lifetime banned. But
Not
it
me.
took,
That was not
no.
me.
But it took
I went 0-7. It was great.
but it took FFG how long to actually implement that ban, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you have a player ID system, you know who it is. It's like, bam, it can happen. Obviously,
It's also
there's
good
bigger
for
issues.
tracking, right? If people have a player ID and they log their deck, then you can get all sorts of statistics on what deck is performing best in the meta based on all these people that reported their results. Not only is that cool for players to see, like, oh yeah, my Newt Gunray deck really blocked the Trade Federation and it was awesome, but also like FFG could use that to inform their design, their balancing, and things like that. So I would be really excited if they really lean into the player ID system and encourage reporting. I know some card games like Ashes by Flathead Games used to even have you report kitchen table games. They had like a form you would fill out that would like Twitter tweet. I don't know, I'm too old for that. Twitter your results to like the world. Be like, this deck played this deck and this one won. But my assumption was they were using all that data in their balancing and decision making for future sets. So there's a ripe opportunity for FFG to do something awesome with the player ID system.
Well, and Flesh and Blood, like you even sign up through the site, like for locals, and if like you register through the site with your player ID number for like everything.
Yeah, Bandai does it through an app on your phone right now. It's amazing. Some people don't like it. I heard in Discord, but I like it. So,
that kind of centralization offers you a lot of advantages. You've got the stat tracking, you've got the convenience of it. It's all kind of there. It's. I remember when I was trying to run tournaments for Argent Saga, there was the Argent Saga website and then a whole separate website for their tournament organization and like Mantis, I feel like, was software that. So having that all in one place under one roof, that the company is like taking the responsibility for all of this, is great, assuming there's the follow through. But if the system isn't good, if it's not updated, if they don't actually have the follow through, then what we have instead is this thing that's kind of taking up all the oxygen in the room that might make it actually more difficult for kind of the independent tournament organizers to actually get things done, because now they're not building from scratch. They're having to unbuild, then rebuild. It's a little bit more of a doomsayer attitude than I want to strike, but it's certainly a criticism that, considering big companies can screw things up, and I think it's fair to kind of like unpack all of that. Now, that said, the game could be a smashing success, and the competitive OP could not work out well. Like,
Yep.
That, I think Lorcana is probably on that trajectory. That's my guess, is that that's going to be like the super casual friendly game. So, in my opinion, I think Unlimited is going to have to appeal to some of the more hardcore card game players, as well as the more hardcore investor class, because I don't think Lorcana is going to do it, but Lorcana is probably going to suck a lot of the casual players away. That's based on the little I know about both of these games. That's my speculation.
That's fair. And I think that this is where I will be positive, right? A lot of times in the past, it felt like organized play at FFG expected the community to organize the play. And here it looks like they're really trying to lean into leading that front, which I think is super important for this game. There's a lot of competition in the TCG market, right? There's always the big three, but like I think the big three mentality is almost gone. Some of the smaller games, some of the games from Bandai are so popular that you can't even get product. And not just because they underprinted it, but just because the demand is so high. So they can't rely on just Star Wars selling this game. It's going to sell some of the game, but their organized play pitch is a really strong one if it follows through, and they're really showing differences from the past with this plan of organization, the plan of a player ID system. If it works out, it's going to be great.
So far, I think like the Too Long Didn't Listen for the podcast is, we think they're going to make a great game. And if they follow through with everything else, right, it's going to be Grand Slam. Or,
well, they're making all the right mouth sounds.
Yeah. Or they're going to
cheap
ground out into a double play, right? So
there's going to be a lot of prequel memes about this game if it doesn't work out. That's all I'll say.
Oh, yeah.
If not already.
Well, that kind of brings me to the end of the notes that I took off the live stream. Were there any other specific parts of it that we didn't touch on that you guys wanted to hit?
2024, right? So they said this game launches globally in 2024. That's a long time away. So I saw a lot of speculation of, does globally 2024 mean there might be a local release earlier? I would love that. I would be sad for all the non-local players that don't get that advantage. But I'm excited that they're giving us information this far ahead of time for a TCG release. I'm trying to think of Destiny. I feel like they announced it at Gen Con, and then store pre-releases were like a month later. So hopefully we get a lot more information leading up to this to hype people up, to get people to sign up for the website. I really hope that's the thing they drive home as soon as possible, right? Get that website up and running so people can register, get notifications when these articles come out. They've got plenty of time between now and 2024 to slow drip information. But if it's too slow, that can also lose steam. So I hope we get a lot of information, not, everything all at once, but slowly leading up to the release.
I think the speculation about a possible local release in 2023 at the end of the year yet is the way they really emphasized global release in 2024, right? They really overemphasized the global release in 2024 to the point where it's like, so what about the US, right?
I read that the opposite way, right? Oh, go for it.
He really emphasized it, and then the next thing he said was I am not putting any particular emphasis on any of these words. It's like, dude, you clearly just did. It reminded me of the lady doth protest too much. Yeah. And that implied to me there might be something at Gen Con. That's pure speculation, but if I'm somebody who has a board game product that's not going to come out until next year, but I want to get people to lose their minds, I'm going to sell packs at Gen Con this year.
or at least
Was
do a
it-
demo, right? I mean,
Yeah,
for
maybe
Des-
starter decks
for
something.
Destiny, the pre-release was in like September, and they didn't have stuff at Gen Con in August, which is, if they couldn't do that, you'd think they might not be able to do it for Unlimited. But hopefully they have at least a demo or like a poster or something. I'll be there, so I'll take pictures. But I read that interpretation as, I've played a lot of FFG games where they say they're going to have a global release, and then Europe or Australia like lags like a multiple LCG cycles behind America. And I thought they were trying to emphasize, for once, we're going to do an actual global release. It doesn't leak early in Switzerland and then release 9 months later in Brazil. Everybody's getting this the same day.
the
But I
the
could
one
be wrong.
time, the one time the U.S. was the one that was like 3 months behind,
It's true. That's happened before too.
where everyone else
I
got
think you've
it.
actually convinced me. I think I've changed my mind, and now I agree with you. The global emphasis was to be like, "Hey guys, we're not going to screw this up."
Yeah,
I'm
we
totally
have
flipped
a
now.
plan.
I agree with you. So that kind of, I think, wraps up everything we had to say with regard to the live stream. And just to here at the end before we sign off, I wanted to maybe take a minute to talk about each of us to take a minute to talk about kind of our vision of what we want these conversations to be. When I initially started talking to Josh, I thought the idea of breaking it down into kind of three main categories of Star Wars related lore, casual friendly topics, and competitive focused topics is what kind of jumped out at me as kind of the way to approach doing a show about this game. Now, I've done enough of these podcasts over the years that I know plans change. Once you start working on a project, it doesn't always meet exactly what your vision was at the beginning, but at least that's the energy that I'm bringing to the table. So I don't know, Dan, if you want to take a minute and kind of talk about your sort of vision for what we're doing here.
Yeah, so my original idea for a show was that I really want to be invested in like little local metas all around the Outer Rim. So one of the things I want to do is I at this point in my life, I just have to be casual on things. I'll go to Gen Con and do Gen Con things, but I'll, play 5 rounds and then drop because I got other games to play. But I've found at my local meta, I'm playing with a lot of people that are a little bit younger than me. Maybe it's their first card game, and I've been really good at taking them from the casual level to slightly competitive, and then they start crushing me and take off. So I want to do a lot of that kind of content for people that are starting to play casually. Maybe they're getting ready to jump into competitive, and I can kickstart them, and then they can crush me like crazy over the internet. But one of the things I really want to do is invite people to come on and talk about their local meta, right? A lot of people play card games at their kitchen table without knowing they could go play with other people at the store and have a lot of fun. So we're going to try to feature different local metas around the what is it? Galaxy, they're saying. It's a galactic championship at the end. So we want to know if you have a local meta once things pop up, or if people in your group are starting to talk about it and you want to talk about how hyped your group is. Ping me on Discord and let me know, because we can even do a little sideshow or a little article or YouTube mini episode about your local community so that people can find out about the cool stuff you're planning to do. So that'll kick off more once the game is actually functioning and running and people are playing it in stores. But we want to be able to feature people all over the galaxy. So that's my main vision right now. Also talking about lore, I'm very into Star Wars. So if we want to talk about lore, I'm there for it. But for the card game mechanic stuff, casual, a little bit into competitive, and then, losing spectacularly, like the Empire. What about you, Josh?
I want to hang out with some cool people and talk about a cool card game. I want to be approachable to everyone. I want to be appealing to the casual player that tries to come up with the jankiest stuff they can just to try to make it work. And then I also want to be able to appeal to the competitive player. So cover the game from the ground up, right? That's kind of my goal and intention, is to do whatever we can do to try to build and foster a positive, uplifting, healthy Star Wars Unlimited community at this point. So.
Cool people. I'm out. Shouldn't have invited me.
Dude, I was going to make the same joke.
Dang it. Too fast.
Yeah.
Well, there was some discussion as to whether we should come up with some sort of like a sign off and then that discussion didn't reach a conclusion. So I don't have like a see you next time sort of pithy phrase to throw here at the end. But I think we've kind of covered everything that we wanted to hit today. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to say?
I think Josh did have a send off. It was see ya in the arenas, right? The space and ground arenas.
Well, there you go, man.
All right.
Bam. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
See you next time.
I thought you were going to say see you in the arenas.
See you in the arenas. Whatever. I don't
There
know
you
what
go.
else.